At the bottom of the largest ocean on the planet, scientists are finding things that should not exist according to the theories that have dominated biology, geology, and oceanography for decades. Oxygen produced in total darkness without any photosynthetic process. Geological structures containing material from 4 billion years ago, almost as old as the Earth itself. A network of hydrothermal craters so vast that researchers have compared it to an underwater metropolis. New species discovered on deep reefs that no one knew existed. And at the deepest point on the entire planet, 11 kilometers below the surface, the most disturbing evidence of all: plastic. The Pacific Ocean is revealing secrets that force a rethinking of what we believe we know about the origin of life, the history of the planet, and the impact that humanity has had on the only ocean we know, and what researchers have found in recent years could be, without exaggeration, the greatest accumulation of underwater revelations of the 21st century. Leave your like, subscribe, and share. Let us begin. For centuries, humanity assumed that life in the deep ocean was scarce, simple, and of little relevance to the great processes that sustain the planet's biosphere. The logic seemed impeccable. Without sunlight, there is no photosynthesis. Without photosynthesis, there is no production of oxygen or complex organic matter. And without those two things, life cannot prosper in any significant way. Ocean depths were seen as biological deserts where only the most extreme adapted organisms survived, feeding on the scarce organic remains that fell from the upper ocean layers. This view was gradually challenged, starting with the discovery of hydrothermal vents in the 1970s, which demonstrated that complete and surprisingly rich ecosystems could exist without any dependence on sunlight. But even after that revolutionary discovery, no one anticipated what scientists would find in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, a region of the eastern Pacific that extends between Mexico and Hawaii, and which is primarily known for its enormous deposits of polymetallic nodules on the seabed. Polymetallic nodules are rocky formations that develop on the seabed over millions of years, accumulating concentric layers of metallic minerals such as manganese, nickel, cobalt, and copper. They are of great interest to the mining industry precisely for their mineral richness, and the Clarion-Clipperton Zone contains some of the most extensive deposits known in the world, which has generated an intense debate about the viability and desirability of submarine mining in that region. But when scientists began to study those nodules in greater detail, they found something they were not looking for and did not expect to find at all. The polymetallic nodules of the Clarion-Clipperton Zone were producing oxygen, real measurable oxygen in significant quantities, in the total darkness of the seabed, without any source of sunlight, without any visible photosynthetic organism that could explain its origin. This phenomenon, which scientists have called dark oxygen to distinguish it from oxygen produced by conventional photosynthesis, is one of the most disturbing and potentially most important findings of modern oceanography. The exact mechanism by which polymetallic nodules produce oxygen is still being investigated, but the most currently accepted hypothesis involves electrochemical processes occurring on the surface of the nodules, where the interaction between the metallic minerals and seawater can generate a sufficient electrical potential difference to decompose water molecules and release oxygen. If this is correct, it means that there exists a mechanism of oxygen production completely independent of photosynthesis that operates in ocean depths, and that biologists and geochemists had not considered in their models. The implications of this discovery go far beyond terrestrial oceanography. One of the most fundamental questions of astrobiology, the science that studies the possibility of life in other worlds, is where and how life could exist in environments without sunlight. Moons such as Europa, which orbits Jupiter, and Enceladus, which orbits Saturn, have liquid water oceans beneath their frozen surfaces, oceans into which no sunlight penetrates. For years, scientists have speculated about the possibility that those oceans could harbor life based on hydrothermal vents similar to those on the terrestrial seabed. The discovery of dark oxygen adds another possibility, that of electrochemical processes similar to those occurring in the polymetallic nodules of the Pacific could produce oxygen in those extraterrestrial oceans, opening an additional window for the existence of complex life in worlds that until now seem too dark and cold to harbor it. In addition to dark oxygen, the Clarion-Clipperton Zone and the deep waters of the western Pacific near Guam have produced equally extraordinary biological discoveries. In deep reefs near Guam, researchers have identified at least 20 new species that had not previously been described by science. These deep water reefs, formed by corals that do not depend on sunlight to survive, exist at depths where water temperature is very low and pressure is considerable, and harbor biological communities of surprising diversity that scientists are barely beginning to catalog. Each new species discovered in those reefs expands our understanding of the limits of life and adds one more piece to the puzzle of deep oceanic biodiversity, which according to the most conservative scientific estimates is still largely unknown to science. Leave your like, subscribe, and share. The geology of the Pacific seabed is producing equally impactful revelations. Scientists have detected beneath the Pacific seabed mysterious geological structures containing material from 4 billion years ago, an age that places that material in the earliest periods of the planet's history, when Earth was a fundamentally different world than the one we know today, without free oxygen in the atmosphere, without complex life, with volcanic and tectonic activity of an intensity that has no equivalent in modern Earth. This extremely ancient material is found in unusual places within the Pacific tectonic structure, in positions that do not correspond to standard models of tectonic plate movement, suggesting that the geological history of the Pacific is more complex and more ancient than geologists had assumed. These remains of tectonic plates submerged in unexpected places are what some researchers have begun to call lost worlds. Fragments of primordial Earth crust that have survived for billions of years buried under successive layers of sediment and rock, preserving in their chemical and mineralogical composition information about the conditions of the planet in its earliest stages of formation. Studying that material is in a certain sense like reading the oldest pages of the planet's history, pages that on the terrestrial surface have been almost completely erased by the cycle of erosion, subduction, and renewal of the crust that has transformed Earth's surface countless times over the last 4 billion years. The Pacific seabed, with its relative stability in some zones, has preserved those ancient pages in a way that has no equivalent in any other accessible place on the planet. The metropolis of hydrothermal craters discovered in the Pacific is another of those findings that redefine the scale of the active geological processes at the ocean floor. Hydrothermal vents or chimneys, known since their discovery in 1977, are points where seawater penetrates the oceanic crust, is heated by the underlying magma to temperatures of several hundred degrees Celsius, and then emerges back into the ocean loaded with dissolved minerals that precipitate upon contact with the cold bottom water, forming the characteristic chimney-shaped structures that give these formations their name. The ecosystems that develop around hydrothermal vents are of extraordinary richness and diversity, completely independent of solar energy, and are the most accepted models of how life might have arisen on primitive Earth before oxygen existed in the atmosphere. The network of hydrothermal craters discovered in the Pacific is, according to the descriptions of the researchers who have studied it, one of the most extensive known in any ocean in the world. The comparison with a metropolis is a metaphor that the scientists themselves have used to convey the scale of the system, which does not consist of a few isolated chimneys, but an interconnected network of craters and sources of dimensions that suggest an underlying geothermal activity of exceptional proportions. The ecosystems associated with this hydrothermal network are correspondingly rich, with communities of chemosynthetic organisms, giant tube worms, crabs, and fish adapted to the extreme conditions of temperature and chemistry of the environment, forming complete and self-sufficient ecosystems in the darkness of the ocean floor. The beryllium-10 anomaly detected at the Pacific seabed adds an additional and particularly intriguing dimension to this catalog of discoveries. Beryllium-10 is a radioactive isotope that forms primarily in the upper atmosphere when cosmic rays interact with atmospheric nitrogen and oxygen, and that gradually falls to the ocean where it is incorporated into seabed sediments. Beryllium-10 levels in ocean sediments have been extensively studied as a tool for dating those sediments and for reconstructing the history of solar and cosmic activity in the past. But what researchers found in certain sediments on the Pacific seabed was an inexplicable increase in the concentration of beryllium-10 that cannot be explained by normal variations in cosmic or solar activity, and which scientists have dated to approximately 10 million years ago. The cause of that anomalous increase in beryllium-10 10 million years ago is still subject to debate and investigation, but among the hypotheses that scientists are evaluating are the possibility of a supernova relatively close to the solar system that would have increased the flux of cosmic rays reaching Earth, or some type of extraordinary geological event that would have temporarily modified the capacity of the Earth's atmosphere to produce beryllium-10. Any of these hypotheses, if confirmed, would represent a first-magnitude discovery about the history of the planet and its cosmic environment 10 million years ago, a period in which primates already existed on Earth, though humans would still take millions of years to appear. And then there is the finding that perhaps should concern us most, not because it challenges our scientific theories, but because it confirms something we already knew but had not seen so directly and so impactfully. In the Mariana Trench, the deepest point of all the world's oceans, 11 kilometers below the surface of the Western Pacific, at the most inaccessible and most remote place on the planet, researchers have documented the presence of plastic contamination. Plastic bags, packaging fragments, microplastics distributed in the sediment of the deepest point of the ocean at a distance from the surface that makes any possibility of recovery or cleaning practically inconceivable with current or foreseeable technology. The plastic that humanity has produced since the mid-20th century has literally reached the deepest and most inaccessible corner of the planet, and its presence there is a reminder that no place on Earth is any longer completely beyond the reach of human impact. The Pacific Ocean is speaking, and what it says is both complicated and urgent. It tells us that life is more resilient and more creative than we thought, capable of producing oxygen in darkness and of thriving in conditions we would have considered incompatible with complex biology. It tells us that the geological history of the planet is older and richer in extraordinary events than current models capture. And it tells us that we have gone so far with our contamination that even the deepest abysses now bear the mark of our presence. All of that together, the wonder and the warning, is what makes the recent discoveries in the Pacific something that deserves to be called, without hyperbole, the greatest underwater revelation of the century. Leave your like, subscribe, and share. Until next time.